combined school down in Sussex, so a long way, and I apologise if you can't understand my accent. We call this English, I don't know. It's a bit tricky, I found it. Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done with the primary curriculum and what I think we will do next, and particularly from this point of view of seeing it as an opportunity. Because I have to say, I've been blogging and writing things since just before the first draft came out. The first draft upset me greatly. By the time we got to the final version, I kind of got over that. And actually, in the last year, I found that there are lots of good things about the new national curriculum. And there are some bad things as well, but you can always work around these things coming. So we'll talk about where I think the strengths of it lie and what you can do with it, and how hopefully provide you some positives. So, first of all, I don't know how many of you know who I am, so I'll do the who bit. My name is Michael T. Like I said, I teach down in Sussex, although moving to Nottinghamshire in the summer. So if you know anything useful or help about that, I'd really be glad to have got to do that. And mainly I've ended up inviting this because of the work I've done on the primary curriculum, especially, mainly the things that are on my website and my blog. So if you haven't seen that, the website primarycurriculum.me.uk, the first thing I did was to organise the content in a way that's actually useful for somebody who teaches in a classroom rather than publishes documents at the DFE. So when I'm teaching and planning things, if I want to know about coverage, I'm firstly interested in the year group I'm teaching and the content I've got to cover. And obviously there's a big picture stuff to do, but for day-to-day stuff it's much more useful for me to have the year 5 things all together by subject and then to be able to go to my section in particular. So I organised that, and when I started to do that, I found actually some of the other work I was doing alongside the curriculum was useful, and I shared it locally, and then more broadly I thought it seems silly to keep emailing this to people and having people email saying, I've heard you've got this. So it's all online. So you can see the content is on there, but also some support documents, so things I've used for meetings with governors and parents, a progression framework now for English and Maths at my school's put together. So by all means, have a look on the website if you haven't seen it already and download things and share them freely. I had an email Friday, I think, from somebody from Oxford, from the OUP, saying, we love your website, have you seen ours? You can just sign up for £99 a year or something. So I think they're judging me as their onboarding. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this thing of, well, we've heard a lot about it this morning, freedoms that we get in the new national curriculum. And like I said, when I first saw the draft, that was the slimmed down national curriculum, I wondered who they got to explain what slimmed down was. And we've still got now this final version of 200 pages. Has anybody printed it out in their school? Somebody mentioned it at one point, and you could visibly see the bursa blanching as somebody read it. There are about 50,000 words in that document, which is not my idea of slimming things down. But actually, when you, like a geek might, spend some time unpicking that, it's not as bad as it first seems, because 67% of it, 2/3 of that document is non-statutory content. Actually, it's some really good non-statutory content. As a mathematician, the objectives are fine, but some of the stuff that's in the non-statutory explanations is really useful. Do come in, sorry. Squeezing where you can. So yeah, that 67%, I'm glad it's in there, but actually when you first see that document you think, okay, this is 6 years of teaching, it's not as bad as it first looks. And something that I do think is really important is that generally as teachers, although we might not like the emphasis that's put on the accountability side of things, we are of the view that primary education should be largely about English and Maths, it should be mainly those things. And I think, my personal view is the rest of the curriculum should be supporting that in lots of ways. And it's really important that we have broad and balance, but actually the detail of that, I think for 7-year-olds, it doesn't matter that much exactly which bit of history they've covered. They just need to have some of that generality and use it to support their broader learning. And I think that's the right move here, that we see that actually when you take out that non-statutory thing, you can see that the English, Maths and Science quite rightly make up a quarter of the pages in the whole document, and the foundation stuff's really slim. And there is a lot of scope there actually, particularly when we first saw the draft for history, it looked horrendous, but the reality has been quite different. So in fact, for the whole of Key Stage 1 and 2, there's 200 words of content for music, and it largely says things like, you know, sing songs with them and learn some musical stuff. And there's a little bit in the end about historical composing things, but it's not too awful. And most of the foundation subjects are quite like that. The art leader in my school, when I gave her the page on Key Stage 1 and 2 art, I said, oh, here's the national curriculum. And she said, when do we get the full thing? I said, no, that's it. And it essentially just says, do some art, doesn't it? Like, if you look at the art pages, you just look and think, well, obviously that's what we've done anyway. So I think there's a lot of strength in that freedom there. Even the history, which initially was horrendous, is actually not too bad now. The statutory bit is quite limited. There are 9 units of work you've got to cover in the primary school, and it suggests what you might do in it. So it's got a unit on Anglo-Saxons and Vikings and a unit on Anglo-Saxons and Scots and 4 or 5 bullet points about what you might do there. I have to say in my school we've merged that into one unit on Anglo-Saxons and other people. Partly because I was just saying, when you live on the Sussex coast, there's not a lot of Viking stuff about. It's not something you can really get a grip on. So we can talk about Vikings as this thing that happened up north, but we can't do a lot with it. So we've merged those into one unit because it doesn't say about how much time you have to spend on it or what depth you have to go into. They just have to have a broad overview of those periods. So what looked horrendous to start with actually does leave primary schools with quite a lot of space. It probably does mean reworking some of the units, so you might lose your time on Victorians and Tudors that you used to have, or you might not. I did some work with head teachers in Islington in London who were saying, it's crazy, we've taught Victorians for years because we're teaching Victorian buildings, we've got a Victorian building right next door. Just make that your local history unit, or make that your beyond 1066 unit. There's still scope for you to do that, and in some schools that will be, but I really love Tudors. Well, then do it. Do that as your extended study, compare it with something maybe. So there's actually quite a lot of scope there for being able to do things that you would want to do. Steal your stuff. Is there anybody here who's been teaching more than 10 years? So I apologise for the impact this might have on you if you're in primary schools then, because I want to remind you of something. Remember this? It still makes me feel a bit twitchy. If you weren't the primary school teacher 10 years ago, this is the suggested, I think it was, structure for the National Literacy Hour. And we use the word suggested very loosely. People's lives were made and broken by overrunning the 15 minutes of the first bit. Actually, in comparison to what we had in those strategies, the optional strategies, along with the optional QCA schemes, there is a lot more freedom now. It doesn't look like it to start with, but I think sometimes we forget this because we've all kind of moved away from that now and we realise how stupid it was. But sometimes we forget how awful it was to start with. And similarly, if we look at, this still amazes me when I look at it now. Again, if you weren't teaching when the literacy hour arrived, you lucky thing, this was one term, actually it's one page of one term's objectives for English. So for 5 hours a week, you had to do your structured language stuff, which fitted into the 15-15-2010. That was like ingrained on your mind. There were classrooms with it on the wall. Like the children were supposed to hold you accountable because you'd overrun your 20-minute slot. Your plenary wasn't long enough. And we had these long lists of objectives for each term, and even to the point, this astounds me now that I look at it, I was told what term I was allowed to do novels in. This term you have to do a persuasive writing to argue a point of view. It didn't matter what else was happening in your school that term, this is what you do in literacy in year 5 summer term. I don't imagine if you were doing that now, and actually when we look at the comparison, it's amazing the difference. This was the reading and writing for non-fiction. So you can see this part here, from 12 to 16, told you what you had to cover in reading comprehension, just for non-fiction texts. There's a whole other section for fiction for one term in year 5. And that was repeated right the way through from reception to year 6. If we compare that to what we have now, that's the reading comprehension for 2 years worth of Upper Key Stage 2. There are masses of appendices with long lists of spellings, and there's lots of information about grammar. And do you know what? That information about grammar is really important. And it's the only good thing, really, that was in that first literacy folder. Has everybody still got their green and blue national numeracy strategy folder? Keep that. Cling to that, because that was good. That exemplification thing is really useful. If you've still got a literacy folder, burn it somewhere. But you maybe want to keep the grammatical stuff back. But actually, that's not too unreasonable, I don't think. The stuff that's in there, particularly for English, which could be awful, is not too awful. There looks like a lot of content in those pages, but actually there's a lot more freedom. Like I say, when we compare to what we had for the strategies, what we've had since on various occasions, it has been awful. So I think there's a lot more scope for doing things that you can do a bit more freely, particularly with the English. If you're working in a school that has a thematic curriculum, there is nothing to say that that can't carry on. And it did worry me at first. I was going around to schools who were saying, but we've always done cross-curricular, and now we're going to have to do separate subjects, aren't we? And nobody said that, and nobody can make you do that. And that's really important. There are a couple of things that the DFE would have liked to have done. They'd have liked to have got rid of attainment targets altogether. And they'd have liked to have been able to say, you have to teach these things discreetly in this order. So they've set some things out by year group. But the law for the national curriculum says they can't dictate those things. They're not allowed to tell you how much time to spend on things. They're not allowed to tell you what order to teach in within the key stage. So actually the freedom is still there. If you want to move the Stone Age study to year 6 because it fits for you, then do it. Because you are the people who are in control of that bit. And we found that this year we've done a lot more of, I can see what they were thinking when they put this curriculum together, but we're not doing it like that because this works for our school or our locality or our children. Which hopefully means, this was the other one, things looked a bit brighter when this first came out, I think. Then it got followed by lots more folders and packets, and there was a while where they kept sending out DVDs as well, wasn't there? Everyone coming to watch DVDs in staff meetings of classes of about 17 children, all of whom were beautifully behaved and had clean whiteboards. How did they get those? They don't exist in real life. So I think actually the national curriculum, which looks awful to start with, isn't as bad as it first looked. There's lots of scope there for keeping working the way you are. If you haven't already seen it, I wrote an article probably about a year ago now with 5 steps to the new national curriculum, and the first thing I wrote on it was keep and tweak. For the vast majority of primary schools, I think the majority, perhaps not the vast majority, but the majority of your curriculum could stay as it was. Then there are going to be some bits that you need to tweak here and there, particularly for things like fractions in maths. There's going to be a higher demand. So there's a few things where you need to up the game a bit with those. But for schools that have got fantastic projects of work going on, and there are schools who are doing, what's the thing, was it grow, cook, video, film, something, there's a whole sequence of things. There are schools that are doing these schemes, there's nothing to say you can't carry on with them. And there's no reason why those things can't fit with this new content. Actually, when you strip out all the detail that's provided in the appendices and say what do we actually have to do, it's not as bad as it first looks. In fact, I think, though, it does give us an opportunity to think about some other things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've started to do as a school. I'm actually leaving my current school now, but I'm hoping that's a legacy that will carry on. It's one of those things when you leave, isn't it? You think you've started all these brilliant things, and you just know you're going to go back in 2 years, and somebody said, oh yeah, we tried, but we changed our minds about that. I just wonder about how many schools still have these. So I said, this is one of those things that we've kind of gone towards again with excellence and enjoyment.